Entitled parents. How I started a revolution in my entitled family. All I wanted was my sisters. I am currently in custody of my two little sisters, Amy, who is 17, and Liza, who is 8. Not their real names for obvious reasons. I am a 29 male and we live in Australia. I am Potato, as that's what Liza calls me, and this is basically the story of how my family felt they were entitled to both of my sisters' bodies, and I wouldn't stand for that. I would like to warn anyone who has faced abuse in the past, as parts of their story may trigger some people, and to anyone who has faced abuse in the past, I do feel deeply sorry for you. The main part of the story takes place about a year ago. I'd moved out 6 years ago at the time and moved to another state for work and study. I was honestly really slack with keeping contact with my family, which is probably why this went on so long. When I do think back to the time before I moved out, I didn't treat Amy the best, and if I hadn't moved out and had so little contact with my family, I may have turned out just as entitled and as much of a horrible person. I came back to visit for a grandparent's birthday. After spending so long away, I spent the morning catching up with aunts, uncles, cousins, my parents of course, and Liza. Now this was actually the first time I'd really realized the oddities of my family. Perhaps it was the change in environment. A few of my roommates had little sisters and whatnot after all, but it was the first time I'd noticed how quiet the little girls of my family were. I guess I'd always just thought of Amy as shy and quiet, but my little cousins were so much the same: polite, shy, quiet and obedient. Though at the time I brushed this off. After a few hours, I realized that Amy was nowhere to be seen all day. The party was at my parents' house, so this confused me, and I slipped inside to see if she was cooped up in her room like a lot of 16-year-olds would be, talking to friends or doing assessments. What I found is a memory that will haunt me forever. My oldest uncle on my father's side, laying over my sister, who was quite clearly in a lot of pain and struggling not to cry as he pinned her beneath him. I completely lost it, as any brother would, shouting at him to get off her and out of her room. I scared the hell out of both of them, but in that moment, I was honestly ready to kill my uncle. Amy was pretty messed up in the head when I tried consoling her. She was covered in scares, had a rash that I later found out was an allergic reaction. She was allergic to strawberries. She didn't speak and looked at me as if she expected for me to hurt her too. Her room was dimly lit, the blinds taped closed to her wall. All the things she'd had when I left were gone, leaving her bedroom feeling cold and empty, and to add insult to injury, she was a month pregnant. When I demanded an explanation from my parents, they, paraphrasing, said that it was my uncle's right, and my father simply pointed out one of my 11-year-old cousins sitting quietly with her parents and told me to have fun. I stormed off back to Amy's room, quietly packed her a bag of necessities, and managed to sneak her out of the house and into my car before doing the same with Liza. Part of me wanted to get all my cousins out too, but my main focus was of Amy right now, who sat trembling in the back of my car. I drove them both to the closest police station to report what was happening. I'll skip most the details of the legal battle that ensued, but my family did not take kindly to being outed for what they were doing. It was a tradition that spanned generations, and there shouldn't be anything wrong with tradition. Amy and Liza were put into temporary foster care. Amy was wrecked. To her, everyone could and would hurt her, and I got reports every few hours that she was having a panic attack. 3 of my uncles went to jail for a very long time. I got a fair bit of money out of the range of family members, full custody of both Amy and Liza, no enforced visitation to their parents. My parents had to pay for any therapy costs, medication and medical needs for both of them. My family was torn in two by this, many of my aunts leaving their husbands with their children after finally having the courage to follow me. Uncles who had married into the family took their wives who had also been abused and cut off ties. I still keep in contact with these members of my family, and I'm grateful for their support and glad that my cousins are safer now. Even some of the older guys who had been brought up thinking it was okay to treat women that way took themselves into counseling once they realized just how messed up it was, and I've had more than one instance where they admitted to hurting Amy and apologized, which I've accepted, as these cousins did their best to take their siblings or other cousins out of harmful environments. Now I do believe some part of the ruling protected the younger men of the family provided they see some form of mental health professional as they grew up thinking that this was all normal, so they didn't end up in jail, but did end up on some list of possible sex offenders. Not entirely sure there. No one is sure who fathered Amy's child, but she had her pregnancy terminated as we were told her physical and mental health would not cope with carrying a baby she ultimately would unlikely care for. She did consent at the time, and it was brought up by her psychologist once she was doing better, and she confirmed that she would have no love for the baby due to the circumstances which she fell pregnant. For 6 years, Amy had been physically, sexually, mentally and emotionally abused in every way conceivable. This mostly came from my father's 4 brothers and brother-in-law who married into the family. My parents both stood by and let this happen, offering no support for Amy. During the case, my uncles argued it was their birthright being born into their family, and it was simply Amy's rite of passage before she was married off to one of my uncle's mates at 18. They used her allergy as a form of torture and manipulation, wanting her to be silent and obedient. They would press strawberries against her skin any time she said a word and force her to eat them when she stepped too far out of line. A lot of my aunts from my father's side admitted to enduring this treatment too, although most of them were lucky and didn't have allergies to exploit. I honestly can't even begin to explain everything that was wrong with Amy because of their behavior. Liza, for the most part, was okay. She needed a little therapy as she was being groomed into compliance and taught that what she would experience was normal, but Amy had completely shut down. It took 2 months before I could even get her speaking. She trusts me now, and we often sit down, and I let her talk and open up about whatever she feels comfortable to. Her stories often have me struggling to hold back tears while I comfort her. I did get Amy a service dog a few months ago, tailored towards the emotional support she needs on a regular basis. Lickety Split honestly is the goodest of good doggos. She knows exactly when she's needed and is a massive help when it comes to calming Amy's anxiety, especially in public. We've had more than one encounter with unrelated entitled parents thinking they or their kid deserves her dog more than her. Let me know if you want these stories published too, because I've seen people like to read about service dog related incidents, but anyone who does think that can honestly fight me. No one deserves her dog more than her. On one occasion, one of my aunts, her husband went to jail, tried taking Lickety Split because their money paid for her. I told her if she ever comes near my property again, I would call the police as there was a restraining order against her towards both my sisters. Later she came back and tried to poison Lickety Split with tainted meat, but one of my lovely neighbors caught her and chased her off. Police were called. She is now in jail too after having to pay a fine and some money to me because at this point, I'm pretty well acquainted in the legal system and sued her. My family still tried to get my sisters out of my care, reporting me for everything from animal abuse to drug trafficking. They planted drugs in an identical stuffed toy to Amy's comfort toy, left it in the yard, but Amy would never do that, so I knew something was up immediately. Home security systems work wonders. I've actually become pretty chummy with the local police officers who have to inspect their claims, but they know I'd never do anything to endanger my custody over the girls. They mean the world to me. I will admit though, I have done things to hurt me bond with them, yelling when stressed and throwing things from time to time, but I'm not perfect, and Amy has told me that although these moments do scare her, she doesn't feel endangered being near me when they happen. I also spoil them a little when they do happen. Now the reason this ended on it is because a few weeks ago my mother contacted me saying she wanted to talk. I was hesitant, but agreed, and we met up in the next town over. No way I could be followed home. My mother explained how she was in the process of divorcing my father and she wanted to have a relationship with me and my sisters, with emphasis on mending her bond with Amy, who had not called her mum in years. She explained how she was pressured into the marriage after she gotten pregnant with me and never wanted that life for her daughters. I flat out told her no, something several members of my family disagreed with, as she could have done literally anything to support Amy emotionally with what was happening, done anything to make her feel better or more secure with what was happening to her, but instead she was shunned and isolated except for when she was needed to cook, clean or provide some sort of service to the family, even going as far as to berate her whenever she did try to confide in my mum that she was in pain or scared. Amy was well past her breaking point when I took her and had even planned on killing herself less than a week after my visit. My mother argued that she had the same right as the other members of my family who had left and had contact with my sisters, but I told her it was because they were doing it to protect their children and themselves. They didn't wait a year after losing custody to try and fight for them, and I really don't even need to give a reason. I have custody and she does not. Members of it have convinced me that when Amy is in a better place mentally and Liza is older, I bring it up with them, leave the decision in their hands. I've been told Amy will be a dependent well after she turns 18, her mind just doesn't function properly, so there is no risk of her mother getting into contact behind my back even when she's an adult. And while Amy does have a phone and a computer, she doesn't have any social media, as she doesn't want any chance of her family trying to contact her, as they've threatened her with many forms of torture in the past. This story doesn't have a slam dunk ending. I have my sisters and they're in a safe environment where they'll get to grow up as kids. Amy is getting the help she needs and is slowly making her way out of tower she built to protect herself in the only way she could, but she knows there isn't a rush to come out. I'll work with her at the pace she sets. She's still discovering her own interests, but quite like just reading a book with a form of fruity tea. She also has a small collection of stuffed animals, mostly Build-A-Bear, that she adores and takes one with her everywhere. She's sensitive to texture, so the feeling is a comfort for her, and once a week we sit down to try to find older bears she likes. We only have 3 Build-A-Bears on her wish list, and honestly, I've loved helping Amy discover herself. She lost a lot of her ability to think and feel for herself during this time, and watching her find her favorite book genre or her favorite types of music is a great feeling, knowing how far she's come, and I live for the days she actually manages a smile. Your yard is now our park. My partner and I purchased the house next door to my best friend. I had lived with him for close to a decade when his kids were babies, so they viewed my house as an extension of theirs, and were in and out all day, every day. I have a more flexible schedule than he and his wife, so I have them in the mornings, after school, and on days off of school. I had a pool in my yard, and because my friend's kids were still little, I installed a retractable cover and made sure it was locked so they couldn't open it. My friend's yard had one of those wood fort climbing wall swing set deals and a large sandbox. Throughout the year, we spent most evenings outside, grilling, drinking, and watching the kids play/swim/whatever. One summer day, I came home from work a little earlier than normal, and started to prep for dinner. I heard a knock at my back door, which was odd, since my buddy's kids never knocked. I went to see who it was and discovered a mom and 2 kids who looked to be maybe 57 years old. As I opened the door, she informed me that her kids needed to use the bathroom and that I needed to come out and get the cover off my pool. I was confused and asked her to repeat herself, and she said that her kids needed to pee and that they were hot and bored with playing in the sandbox, so I needed to open up my pool. I asked her why she was in my friend's yard and what made her think her kids were welcome to swim in my pool, or use my bathroom for that matter. She got really bitchy and told me that she had moved into the house behind us and that she had watched my buddy's kids come over all the time and I opened the pool for them. She insisted that since I was willing to open my pool for the kids next door, I should also open it for the children who lived behind me. I tried explaining the relationship between my best friend's family and mine. She claimed it didn't matter that I had known them since birth and pretty much had helped raise them. I just needed to get to know her kids too and it would be okay. I told her no and closed the door on her. She spent a while knocking and fussing at me through the window, and then had her kids pee in a planter on the side of the patio. When I still didn't react, she took her kids back into my friend's yard to play on the swings. I texted him to let him know what was going on. Right at the moment he was letting his 300 pounds worth of new flies out into the yard without noticing the unwelcome visitors. The mom starts shrieking and climbs up into the fort, leaving both kids on the swings. She starts demanding that we put the dogs inside, and how dare my friend let his dogs out into his own yard when her kids are clearly playing there. He tells her to phone calls the police. When the cops arrived, she put on the whole waterworks about how her kids are just looking for friends, and my buddy's kids are somehow bullying her kids, even though they'd never met. That he invited her over just to let his dogs attack her children, blah blah blah. They eventually move her back onto her own property, then come back later to tell us they warned her about coming back. She lived in that house for almost a year before she and her husband divorced. During that year, I had to replace the lock over the pool cover controls 3 times, have a fencing company remove a gate at the back of my property that was meant to let the lawnmower through, and eventually pay a security company to come check on the yard any time we were going to be away for more than a few hours. We found her and her kids in our yards repeatedly, but she'd leave when we got home. What finally resolved the issue was my partner catching her in the pool. She told him she knew the man that owned the house and that he had told her it was okay to swim. He told her he was married to the man that owned the pool and that it's not okay to swim. She apparently had a bad reaction to realizing she was immersing her sons in gay water. We didn't see her again after that. At 2 days past my due date, I shouldn't have used the expectant mother's parents with small children parking spot. My pregnancy was okay up until the last month. It was 95 degrees outside, I was retaining so much water, my sandals hardly fit on the biggest setting, and I was constantly in pain. It sucked. I waddled to the store for a couple last minute things for baby, and I was so relieved that there was a parking spot for Prego's parents near the entrance. I pulled in and took a few moments to chug water and gather my things when I noticed a car pull up to my left. They were half in the handicap parking stall and yelling something out the window. I rolled my window down and here, "You shouldn't be in that spot, you don't have kids. My son shouldn't have to walk from the back of the parking lot," or something to that effect. I was a little stunned to be yelled at tbh. I calmly told her that I was very pregnant, and this stall was for pregnant women too. She kept talking to her son, but at me. "You know what I mean? Sorry son, you have to walk in the heat, because this lady parked in our spot." So, I opened my door and hoisted my giant, land whale-esque body out of my car. She was still turned around talking to her son, and when she finally saw me, I was about 3 feet away from her window. I bent down low. No, I tilted my head down and said, "Do you see how pregnant I am? I think you and your son will be okay walking." And then I saw the son. He was like 7. The kid can walk. She just sighed and drove away. I was so pissed. I wish I said more to her. "You're a capable young man, so I can grab whatever I want from your shopping cart." Details: I am 17 and live in the UK. This happened around December of last year. It happened in Little to be exact. Now this is going to be a very long read, so prepared. Entitled Mummy. Entitled Kid. My mum asked me to go grocery shopping because she was quite busy with something and I agreed to go, so I went to Lidl. I spent around 10 minutes looking for things on the shopping list. I decided to get a treat for myself because why not, and so I got something for a chocolate note. This chocolate wasn't sold at the till in this location. I finally finished finding everything and made my way to the till. I was standing in line while using my phone, just minding my business, until this overly loud parent with her very hyperactive kid who looked around date came behind me in the line. You wouldn't mind letting us go in front of you, would you?" I looked down on her cart, which seemed to be a lot more full than mine, and I decided I'm not in a rush, so why not, and I replied sure, and subtly smiled. She thanked me and went on to go in front of me. My impression of this woman seemed normal until this happened. The eek said as he was pointing to my cart, "Mum, look, it's that chocolate that you promised me to buy next time we go shopping." "Oh yes, darling, I just remembered." The looked up to me and said, "May I grab the chocolate bar? The little one's been eager to get it." Now this chocolate is somewhat far from the tills in this location, and as mentioned earlier, isn't sold at the tills either, so getting a new chocolate bar for myself would have been a chore. I replied, "I'm sorry, I don't think I can give you the chocolate. It's quite far from the tills." Her smile quickly turned into a death stare, and she said in a loud voice, "Right, I don't care how far this chocolate is from here. Now someone like you is more than capable of getting a new bar, so stop making George cross." I replied, "I don't care how capable I am, I'm not going anywhere and this chocolate is staying in the cart." Now there was a lot going through my head at this point, but I remember how the eek was reaching inside my cart trying to grab the chocolate, so I quickly grabbed it myself and held it in my hand. "Eek, Mum, the guy took the chocolate." Right, I've had enough. The reached to my hand to grab the chocolate, but I moved in time and decided to go directly to the cashier and ask him to call the manager. Now the cashier seemed to have witnessed everything, and so he informed the manager about what happened. No more than 2 minutes of me awkwardly standing, and the manager arrives. She walks up to the and quietly asks her to leave, and the kept trying to incriminate me somehow until she finally paid for her groceries and left. Me, the cashier and the manager all had a laugh about it after she left. Now that I think about it, that scene wasn't worth a chocolate bar, but oh well.